It's another Wednesday, and I thank all of you for joining today. We have two dynamic speakers, and I'm sure that you will enjoy the information that will be presented today. I want you to just listen carefully and ask the hard questions. And sometimes what I mean by the hard questions is ask the questions that everyone in the room is thinking about, but they're not so anxious to ask because they may be uncomfortable with the question. So what I'm going to say to everyone, ask the hard questions, because you know something? The hard questions bring clarity and encouragement to our very hearts. So now we have Trisha Ali Shaw, who will be presenting today. Hello, Trisha. How are you?
I'm good, Dr. Phillips. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak today. I'm very excited. I'm very passionate about this topic, and so really looking forward to getting into it.
Well, I'm so happy that you have time for us today. And I'm so happy that you are passionate about your purpose and about this topic, which means that you not only bring expertise, you bring wisdom, insight, and energy. So thank you. So I'm going to just read your bio that I've gotten. Now, I just had it. My problem is my my printer said kaplunk, kaplunk, kaplunk. And I'm working from home. Okay, here you are. Miss Trisha Ali Shaw is an assistant director at the Joint Clinical Trials Office, JCTO, at Weill Cornell Medicine. In her role here at Weill Cornell Medicine, she has oversight of the operations and management of the Quality Assurance Unit, which supports the conduct of high quality, innovative, and ethical clinical research across multiple departments and sites. Trisha also leads the development and implementation of policies, procedures, and best practices to ensure complacent, efficient, and excellence in clinical trials. And I'm telling you, we do need excellence in clinical trials. Being born and raised in Queens, she understands the critical importance of health education and health literacy programs targeting New York City communities. So thank you so much, Miss Ali, for being with us today. Miss Ali Shaw, thank you. And the next voice that you will hear will be Miss Trisha Ali Shaw. And she is going to talk to us about quality assurance, what it is, and what does it have to do with research. Thank you again.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So I'm going to go ahead and share my slides with you guys. Okay, so again, I'm going to be discussing research protocols and quality assurance. Quick agenda, so we'll go over the material. I'll just get straight into the details of protocols and quality assurance, and then we'll leave time for questions at the end. So I do like to start anytime I give a presentation, talk about why are we doing this, right? Why is this even important? And quality assurance is extremely important to clinical trials. I think, foremost, and what I think the most important part of it to me is that it's really ensuring the safety of the participants. I strongly believe that if you are not doing clinical trials and clinical research with first and foremost the patients and the people at the top of your mind, it's really doesn't make sense to do them at all. At the end of the day, the purpose of clinical trials is really to help people, and ultimately we want to cure diseases, help people live better lives, a better quality of life, and longer lives as well. And then also make sure that the data and the results are credible and accurate. And so what does that mean? That really means that is or is what they're saying happening in this trial actually happening? And if the results are positive, then we really need to move forward and make sure that everybody has access to this medicine or this device. And then ultimately, just making sure that that high level quality for each trial that is conducted. So it can be the smallest study, it can be the biggest study, it doesn't matter. We are looking at every single trial to make sure that there is quality in the data and that the participants are safe. I add this next slide, which is a little silly, but I make sure that I add it also in my presentations. As a reminder that, I'm a person foremost, I'm a family person. And I think, clinical trials is very close to my heart. I've been working in clinical trials for 17 years. As Lula said, I was born in Queens. I'm a New Yorker through and through. I've never left. And I think that it's so important to give back to our community. It's so important to have these trials available to people in our communities and to have representation as well throughout the entire city. And so, I'm a assistant director at the JCTO, but I'm also a wife and a mom. And I know that, if there's ever anything wrong with my family, and I had to put somebody in a clinical trial, I would want somebody looking out for me as well. And so I like to keep this at the forefront of my mind whenever I, am dealing with matters of quality assurance in clinical trials. The horse isn't part of the family, though. He was just in the picture that day. So quick glossary, just going to go through a few terms that we use in clinical research. So a principal investigator, so that is going to be the lead person. It's usually an MD or a PhD who's leading the investigation, and they are responsible for conduct of the entire study. There's a supporting study team, so that's usually a set of nurses and clinical research assistants. They're there to really support the study, help the patients understand what they're getting into, and also do all of the background work. The IRB is the Institutional Review Board, and they're the board that does the ethics review, making sure that, the study makes sense and that it's going to be ethical to conduct. There's different types of files that we have in clinical research. So regulatory files contain data specifically about the study, whereas case report forms, it's data about the subjects. We have things that we call adverse events and serious adverse events, which sound, as serious and scary as they should. These are things that occur while a participant is on the trial that we have to report, and they need to be reported, to make sure that these adverse events, whether or not that they're attributable to the study, and it can really determine whether or not a study stays open. There's also deviations. So anytime that something goes against the research protocol, we call it a deviation. Sometimes these are reportable to different agencies. Compliance. So compliance is making sure that you're sticking to the protocol. So the protocol is really the ultimate document for the study. It goes through, I have some slides later that talk about what the contents of the protocol are. But essentially, we want to maintain compliance to that protocol by following everything that it says. There are monitors and auditors who are physical people. They either can come in or do it remotely, and they come to review the data that's being collected to make sure that it's accurate and to ensure safety of the participant again, and also that that the data is being collected by the protocol. And then the other two terms I have here are activation, which relates to opening the study. So there are a number of steps that go into actually creating a study. And the point of activation is really when, let's say you're enrolling in a clinical trial at Cornell, the activation point would be when they're ready to actually have patients on the study. And then termination of the study, which is either there can be a voluntary termination, where, it's apparent that this drug or device is not working, and they decide to terminate the study, or it could just kind of be the natural end of the study where everybody has been on study, they've all completed, and we have all the data that we need. So what is a research protocol? A protocol is a document. It is can be seen as a guidebook. And it really, there's a lot of different parts of it. There's a lot of different types of protocols. Protocols can be very long, protocols can be very short. If we're talking about treatment trials, which are usually when you hear research protocol or clinical trials, you're thinking of a treatment trial. And these are trials where there's a new medicine being tested, or two medicines are being tested against each other. And this document essentially has all of the information in it that's relevant. So, why are we even doing this study? There's a lot of background information. And then it provides a guide of what we do at each step of this study. And this includes information on, what should be considered an adverse event. When do we stop this study? Should we go up a dose? So there's a lot of different things that go into a research protocol. There's a lot of different types of studies. And so it will really depend on what you're looking at. Also, interestingly, it's a relatively new thing. So it's been less than 100 years since research protocols have been developed. And it is we consider this the law of the trial. So everything we do in clinical trials needs to stick to the protocol. And the ethics board is the one that approves this protocol. So how do we get here, right? And so a lot of times we do something called translational research. And translation just means it's moving from one place to another. And at Cornell, we have a lot of interest in what we call bench side to bedside. So that means the bench or the lab. There are things at Cornell. We have a lot of labs. They're developing medicines. They're developing treatments, and the goal is to get it from the lab to the bedside, or what we used to say bedside, but now also research clinic. And a research clinic, it could be a regular doctor's office, or it could be integrated into a system like Cornell. And any regular doctor's office, it could be a research clinic, but it also might not be. So it's always a good, question to ask if you go to your doctor's office, whether or not they offer clinical trials, and they might be able to point you in the right direction. So here's this idea of, translation in motion. So we have lab research. It goes through different phases of clinical trials. And so this is a very high level overview. These terms are usually we see them a lot. So there's phase 1 through phase 4 studies. Phase 1 studies are most routinely the first step in clinical trials. So after the lab research is done, I will, to keep it simple, we'll just say it's a treatment medicine, and the medicine will go through a phase 1 study. And the phase 1 study is really where they look for the right dose. So they'll start at a certain dose and they'll test a few patients. If the patient doesn't have any serious side effects, then we will move to the next phase, which is the efficacy phase, or the phase 2 study. And so this is when we're really looking to see the benefits of it. So in phase 1 studies, they're usually not done for any therapeutic reasons. It's usually testing the level of medicine that a person can tolerate. And it's usually, unfortunately, for very sick patients. A phase 2 study, this is when we're really starting to look at the patients that, are active, are maybe newly diagnosed to the disease. And we're looking to see, okay, now, show us what this medicine can do. And phase 3, we're looking at benefit and safety. So a lot of times you'll see studies saying that they're that there's a placebo, that there's a randomization, that they're testing two drugs against each other. And that's looking to see, you know, this is a new medicine. Is it actually going to do better than another medicine that we already have and we know the safety profile for? And, you know, when we show that that can actually happen, that's really when it moves forward and becomes publicly available. And then we go into what we call phase 4 studies or a post-market study, where we look at the long-term effects. And this process, I mean, you know, usually a minimum of 10 to 15 years. So it takes a very long time for these things to happen. The protocol document itself comes from what we call a study sponsor. So it's the person or the entity that's providing the money for us to actually carry out this study. They take data based from published lab research, incorporate feedback from other investigators, and there's specific key elements that always go into a protocol. So again, this is a high-level overview. It doesn't really go into the details, but these are what we consider essential components. So there has to be a background, right? And, you know, sort of like I was saying at the beginning of this, why is this important? So the same idea, you know, why is it important to do this study? And if you can't say why it's important, you know, why are we doing this? So it's a great first step for, you know, in every type of research protocol, you really have to give the rationale of why we need to do this. There's a research question. So, you know, maybe it's that this drug, you know, can increase somebody's quality of life. Maybe it's that this drug can help get a median, you know, long-term survival to 10 years. You know, there's a lot of different ways that people word research questions. It also has the study design. So how many times are the patients coming in? What are they doing at each visit? You know, really outlining that. A recruitment plan. So how are we going to get patients into this study? And then extremely important and relevant to this presentation, safety, data analysis and collection, and quality control. And, you know, the focus of quality assurance is while a trial is active. So, you know, there are lots of phases of the study, but really when we're focusing on it is, you know, the trial is active and we want to make sure that things are getting done the right way. So now let's get into quality assurance. So like I said before, the principal investigator is ultimately the person that's responsible for all trial activities. You know, but unfortunately, there's always a possibility that even, you know, the most well-designed system will malfunction. So what we have in place is quality assurance in clinical trials, which is systematic and independent, and we're looking at all trial-related activities and documents. And how do we assess this? And we use something called a risk-based approach, which is looking at the parts where it's most likely to see errors or see issues. So for example, if we stick with the example that this is a treatment trial, we're looking at response in all of our patients. So are they responding to the study medication? We're looking at the safety profile. So what is happening to this patient? Are they getting hospitalized a lot because they keep getting anemic? And is this related to the study drug? Has this been evaluated? Has this been sent to all of the different ethics boards that we need to send it to? Does the pharmaceutical company know? So there's a lot of different levels here that we're looking at. Was the subject eligible in the first place? You know, specimen handling. So if we're taking tissue or if we're taking blood, making sure that those specimens were collected properly and are also being stored properly and destroyed properly when the study is being done. And then also record creation and retention. So it's very important, especially now, a lot of clinical trials record creation is electronic. And so also following all of the rules that go along with that. So these are all elements of quality assurance that we are looking at. And, outside of us, meaning the quality assurance professionals, there's also multiple committee oversight. So again, the IRB has oversight. There's also data safety and monitoring committees that are mandatory for treatment trials. And there's also scientific oversight committees. So there's a lot of layers of oversight built in to make sure that the study is going well and that everything, that everything is running smoothly. And if there are any issues that they're attended to very quickly. We're also reviewing, study design. Again, data collection is one that's very important and becoming more and more important as time goes along, because we also want to make sure that the right type of data is being collected so that we know if it's actually answering the research question. We're also on the back end, we're looking for documentation of training. So all of the people that are working on this study where you're treating patients, have you all been trained properly on this study? Have you been trained in clinical trials? Have you been trained to ship specimens? And so, it's one of those things that it might not be entirely apparent at the outset, but it's really, really important to have staff that are adequately trained in doing all of this. There's also the aspect of monitoring and auditing, where we have internal and external entities that are coming in, reviewing the data, reviewing what's been done to make sure that everything is being done, according to the rules and according to the protocol. So I will, in the interest of time, I'll go through this part a little bit quicker to leave some time for questions. But I mean, essentially, quality assurance is happening throughout the entire life cycle of the study. So we're making sure, to review protocols even before the study is activated. During the study is probably when the most of it happens, and that's the monitoring and auditing of the data, making sure that the continuing review is going to our IRB. So every year, the ethics board requires us to submit, requires the study teams to submit these reports, basically saying that the study is being conducted ethically, that all of the participants are on study and, none of them are experiencing very bad side effects and still on the study. And the DSMB, again, which is data safety and monitoring, they're also reviewing sometimes even biannually to make sure that all of the data is pointing in the right direction. And there are other review boards as well. If the study is FDA regulated, the FDA can also come in and review the study. And then at termination, there's additional quality assurance that takes place. So I also think it's, it's good to talk about, how is it actually assured? How do we actually do this? And a lot of it is reviewing documentation. So the study teams are trained on this, and they know that there are certain things that need to be documented. And then what we do is go in and review everything and then make sure that it was being done. So not just reviewing what they have done, but making sure that there's nothing that they missed. Also, we try to make sure that everybody has been trained, and there are training logs and a lot of different ways for us to make sure that this is done. And also coming up with any contingency plans that might need to be put in place. So a clinical trial may be halted because there might be unanticipated problems that pop up. Or, maybe if the participants have all dropped out of the study, there's no way to collect the data. Essentially, it's a way to make sure that a study is still being done in a meaningful way. So we're making sure that this is still occurring, that everybody is safe, and that the study is actually collecting information that's going to be used and going to eventually be generalizable. These are just some of the boards that are participating in quality assurance. So the IRB, data safety and monitoring, which I've said a bunch of times now. There's also radiation safety and pathology boards that weigh in when a study has radiation or tissue collection in the design. And then monitors and auditors they can be external or internal, and they really come in and look at the data that's being collected and provide feedback for the study team. And so, big takeaways here. I do think that, again, really important to remember, most important part of, the research process is that we're contributing to the growth of useful human knowledge. Also, knowing that there are regulations in place to protect all human subjects by guaranteeing adequate trial oversight by multiple parties from undue harm or unwarranted risk. So we are here to make sure that these studies are being done ethically, to make sure that they're not violating any human rights, to make sure that there's a reason for doing this study as well. And, important to remember that we're doing quality assurance at all stages of clinical research. And, we really want to reinforce all the mechanisms that keep clinical research safe and impactful, never one without the other. And I think I just hit 1:30, so I made it just in time. Thank you all so much. I can take any questions or backtrack on anything if there's anything, any specific questions that anybody wanted to ask.
Yeah, I have a question, John Lewis. In reference to informed consent forms that the participants sign, is that standard language, the form that for each protocol, or is it unique to each protocol when they're asked to sign an informed consent? And I have a follow-up question with respect to your response.
Sure. So that's a great question. So we have templates. So we have some language that is standard across all studies. And then we go into each individual study. So some studies, what we'll do is put in information about the actual study. And the most important part of that informed consent is the risks section. So the risks will be adjusted based on the study that you're participating in.
Okay, and as a follow-up, is there language in those consent forms whereby you're consenting to release information to other entities?
So it'll be specified in that consent form. So usually for most studies, the information is going to be released. Let's say if you were participating in a study at Cornell, the information would say that it's being released to Cornell and to the investigator that is doing this study. Sometimes if it's an FDA regulated study, we also have to put in there that your health information can be seen by the FDA because they're monitoring this study as well.
Yeah, and with respect to risk management and quality assurance, how do you prevent erosion of the consent? In other words, how do you prevent informing the patient that there's certain that they found a risk while doing the study?
So how do we inform patients of the risks of, like, specifically, are you talking about like data?
Ongoing study, you're in a study and the investigators find that there's a risk for
I see.
So that's what they call erosion of consent.
So we would, so again, it's going to be very study specific, but let's just say there's a new risk that is found in a medicine that you're on a clinical trial for. The consent is going to get amended to add in this new risk, and then every single patient will be contacted to come in, and the study team is going to explain everything. And at that point in time, you can decide whether or not you would like to stay on the study. And if you wanted to stay on the study, you would have to re-sign the consent form at that time.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Those are great questions.
Thank you.
Yes, they are.
I've been studying for a while now.
Yeah, really important. That's really important. You know, risks, as risks are coming up, right? Because these are a lot of times, right? We're getting information from these trials in real time. And so, you know, if a certain proportion of clinical trial participants have the same side effect, we're going to tell all of them that this is happening, and they do have a choice to opt out, or they can stay in if they feel that the benefits outweigh the risks. So
Who has ownership of any cells that a study may obtain?
So that is going to be in your consent form. So if there's a study where you decide to, maybe there's an optional biopsy, that consent form has to state in it, you can keep my cell, or let's say you can keep my tissue, only for items related to this study. There might be an option that says you can keep my tissue and use it for items related and not related to this study. And so every consent form where you're giving, tissue or blood or urine, the consent form has to be explicit. And if it's not, you should ask.
Does that also indicate compensation to the participant, or does it
It
go?
could.
It could?
Yeah, it could. It really depends on the way that the study is structured, and then the way that the consent form is structured.
Okay, thank you. I have another question, but I don't want to take up too much time.
Does anyone else have a question? If not, then John, go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, in terms of, I've been doing some studies, and I find that, they find some antibiotics that, or cells that could reproduce themselves, and pharmaceuticals and researchers want these cells because they could continue doing research. But the participant never gets a dime from that. Is there any way to ensure that these consent forms or a group or a committee that will lobby that the patient or the family benefits if they find some positive and beneficial help for society at large?
Yeah, I mean, that's a loaded question. There's so many, historically, there's been so many of these instances. The cell lines that have never been correctly attributed to the people that actually provided them. I think what we're doing now in the research community is sort of putting in more safeguards so that it doesn't happen as much anymore. But also that it's more along the lines, if you're donating they would consider, not so much donating, but if you're allowing somebody to take and use your tissues, the consent form really has to be very specific in saying that you're allowing them to use this, and you understand that you're not going to, you won't know necessarily what they're doing with it. So before, I think the issue was that it wasn't clear, right? People were donating tissue, or giving away, they were giving their tissues in research, but they weren't sure what was going to happen with it. Whereas now the consent forms are going to be more explicit in saying, this is what's going to happen with it. If you're okay with it, you can say yes. If you're not, you can say no.
Yeah, but even when you give your consent, is there explicit language there, specific language rather, indicating that the family or the person will benefit if it does good, or some new medicine is produced as a result of that? That's the question. because, as you all know, economic pharmacy makes tremendous amount of monies. And it affects a lot of folks in our community and in the past that have not benefited economically from the research. So I just curious.
Yeah, it's not, again, it's a little bit of a loaded question. I guess for me, I know that, what we try to do is put in the language in the consent form to make it explicit about what can be done and what can't, in terms of, whether somebody that's doing that you're doing research with, and whether or not they would, I guess give that person or that family, like compensation. That's an area that I don't have any experience in. But I get it. And like, historically, these are big questions, and they're important questions too.
Yeah, but and I like to discuss this is why particularly the African American community are afraid to go to do research, because if you go back from colonial times to present, they haven't been compensated for research and that help the community, the society at large. So I believe you folks who are professional need to start lobbying and to make a change there.
Well, John, in defense of the healthcare system, it's not only, I think, not only that responsibility lies with the professionals, it lies with the community as well.
Well, that's why I'm raising the questions.
Oh, okay, all right. So it's something that we all need to come to the table about and agree to disagree, or disagree to agree, however you want to put it. But
Yeah.
I understand, and what you're saying is quite true. However, I'd like to thank Ms. Trisha Ali Shaw for her very insightful presentation. Thank you so much. And now I would like to introduce our next guest. Not unless Ms. Shaw would like to add anything else.
No, I just want to say thank you to everybody being such a great and patient audience with me. And you can always reach out to me if you ever have any other questions. Again, I think my takeaway that I would like everybody to have is that there are people that are looking out for participants in research. And we are here to make sure that the safety of the patients is at the forefront of all of this.
Thank you so very much. And it warms my heart to see you as a professional. You are making that commitment to the research community, and it's needed. So thank you again, and thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
Now we'll have our next presenter, and that's Dr. Alejandra Aguirre.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Phillips. Hello, everyone. I'm Alejandra Aguirre. I'm with the Irving Institute for Clinical and Translational Research at Columbia University. My background is working with communities around their involvement in health research, including having these difficult conversations around participant compensation and what is equitable and what is fair when community members participate in research. How do we facilitate their participation? What is their role? And also, again, what is in it for them in addition to, say, financial compensation? How else can individual research participants benefit from participation in research, in addition to the contribution that they are making to our learning about the issue that we are studying? So that is actually the topic of my presentation today, the role of community in health research. So I'll be going over some of that, a little bit about the history of how researchers have involved community in the past, and I'll go over some models that those of us community engagement practitioners strongly feel we should move towards, and that should be the way we engage with our communities, regardless of what community that is, right? It could be based on geography, it could be based on some other common attribute or a common feature that our community has. So regardless of whether we're talking about working with a particular zip code or a group because they share a common ethnic or racial background, or because they're all pregnant women, or we're working with a community, say, in another country, what we are promoting is a certain type of engagement that is based on the meaningful participation of community members in all aspects of research. So I won't go over all the aspects of research in detail. I know that over the number of sessions you've had as part of the CRA, you've learned about research. But really here the goal is that the push for the meaningful engagement of community in every single aspect of that research process. So I'll be going over that with you. So let's get started. Now I'm going to ask you, Lula May, if you could let me know if you see the full slide, not the presenters.
I see the full. No, I see the full slide.
Lovely,
Yes.
lovely. Thank you. Because at this point, I don't see any of you. I don't see the box. Okay, great. Thank you. So let's get started. As I mentioned, I just want to go over historically how the relationship between researchers and the community under study has evolved. And it really, it started with the community actually being ignored. And that was, in fact, almost intentional, because of the idea that in order to maintain objectivity, right, research objectivity, we had to separate ourselves from the community or the group, the patients that we were studying. We were studying their condition. And then I think it was also this belief that, as researchers, researchers held more knowledge than the individuals participating in research. And therefore, again, it contributed to this idea that community did not have a role in the research. So then it evolved to research being placed in community. And so now, right, researchers were getting out of their university settings and doing community-based research. So now they were looking at aspects within the community setting, or aspects about a community that contributed or had some role in the health disparities that we were observing. So yes, it moved from the community being ignored now to doing the research in communities. But again, as you can see from the visuals on your screen, there's still, the researcher is still being, still separating him and herself from the group being studied. So then we evolved into the community informed, coming to the acknowledgement that the people we seek to help through our research, the same research that we aim to improve the health of the community, have very valuable insights into helping us understand that phenomena, or what's happening at the community level that is leading to these individual and group health outcomes. And so now you can see from the visual, the researcher is closer, right, to the community, but there's still this separation, right? The researcher is still collecting information, although now the community has a more active role. They're not necessarily partners in this. And so then we arrive at community partnered. And now you can see that the researcher is at the table, and that the researcher is not just at the table, but is sharing the table. And there is less separation and distinction between the researcher and the community that the research is about. So now what we see is under community partnered or community engaged research is that the community has a much more active role in the research process. So now I'll go over this community engagement continuum from the Principles of Community Engagement. This is from the second edition. There's a newer edition in print. You can find this at the website for the National Institutes of Health. You can Google Principles of Community Engagement and you'll get the entire book. I would highly recommend that it be part of your library. It has multiple chapters on actually on the practice of community engagement. And so part of what the book covers is this continuum of community engagement that you have on your screen. From left to right, it goes from engagement approaches that you'll be very familiar with around outreach all the way. And as you move through the continuum, as you see the arrow go from left to right, it becomes much more participatory and equitable, where we arrive at shared leadership. So we can start out with outreach, right? This is, there's some community involvement, but really the idea with outreach is that the communication is flowing out into the community, to the people that we're trying to reach. We're using existing channels. Maybe it's word of mouth, maybe it's flyers or newsletters, but it's really one directional. It's one way from us, the researchers, to our community of interest. And then consult and involve. Those capture more the community involvement. It could be going and talking to our community of interest, getting their opinions, attempting to better understand through their own words what that health experience is like for them, what could be contributing, and what might actually help in terms of treating or correcting that health phenomena that we are observing. Now, through consultation and involvement, we're moving away from this one directional approach, where we're starting to move towards bi-directional, but they're not fully yet involved, right, in every aspect. And also, it's more about like a one-time, or it could be through a series of sessions, right, that we go and seek their feedback. But they're not full participants, and they're certainly not necessarily partners with us on this research. That's where we get to the collaborate and the shared leadership, which are on the far right. When we get to collaboration and shared leadership, look at the shared leadership. We are sharing. We are equal partners in the work. And that means that the community, usually represented through a community-based organization or another nonprofit group that provides services in our communities of interest, is working with us to set that agenda. What are those priorities? What are the health priorities of the community that we seek to work with? What are therefore, how do we then take those research priorities and ask questions that are important to the community? And so as we go through each of the, the research, the phases of research, the agency, our community, gets something concrete out of it. And that can range from capacity building and also using the data that we collect from these research activities to also support their own mission. So that's the idea, that when we get to shared leadership, our partners are not only at the table, but they're setting the table. And I love that analogy, because normally, right, we invite our partners to the table after the project has been funded. And at that point, we already have, funds to answer a research question that they did not help us to come up with. So instead, here, the idea, the aim is that we start to engage early on, that this engagement, this relationship that we're building with communities is long-term, so that when new funding opportunities come up, including non-funding opportunities, that we already have a relationship with our community, so that we can start to plan the research and other projects in tandem with them. In other words, so that we are working with them to help set that table. And just a reminder, if you have any questions, just unmute and ask. Since I can't see you, I don't know if anyone has raised their hand. Now, let's go over some community engagement models. So there's several community engagement models that fall under that collaboration and shared leadership that I'll go over. Now, I do want to review, well, what is the impact of engagement on research? Why is this important, and why should we be pushing that there be more resources for both researchers and our community partners to be able to do this type of collaborative participatory work? Well, we know that by engaging our community, it helps us prioritize research topics, because this is coming from the community we want to work with. Oftentimes, and I'll show you an example of my own work where this happens, we as researchers go in with a certain agenda in mind, or we think that these are the priorities based on the data. But then when we speak to community, I said, yes, this is affecting us, no question, it is affecting us, but that's actually not what we consider a priority. So it helps us actually prioritize what the community wants addressed. And therefore there will be greater buy-in, right, for the research and the projects, because it is addressing an issue that they have deemed a priority. In so doing, this also increases the relevance of research to patients and communities because the topic came from them. It will also strengthen the recruitment and retention efforts of in our studies, because this is a topic that is of importance to the community. It also helps to frame the study design and the procedures, because our community is there to tell us this is going to work, this is not going to work, try it this way. Communities should also be participating in the data collection and the analyses. Our community will help us ask the questions in the right way, so that we get the data or the information that we need to be able to inform our understanding and our solution to that health issue. They also can have a role in assisting with the data interpretation. Well, what does this mean? We've collected this data. These are the results, but what does it actually mean, and how is it related to the research question? And they can also have a very active and meaningful role in the way that the study findings and the relevance of the study findings to our lives are actually disseminated within our community, and how the results, what we've learned from our research study, how it can lead to the uptake of those research results at different levels. Maybe it has a relevance at the individual level, meaning as a result of this research, we've learned that we should be doing something different or something more. Perhaps it informs, again, what the community agency is doing. And now that leads to a new offering to support their clients as a result of the study that they were participating in. And ultimately, by engaging our community, it builds public trust in research. And after going through COVID, I think that was one of the lessons learned, that we had not built enough trust, public trust, that it led to the vaccine hesitancy that we observed. People mistrusting a vaccine that was, rolled out in about a year. And so because we had not built that public trust in research, understandably, so many people were hesitant about getting a vaccine. So here are 3 models for community engagement. We'll go over these and then I'll show you some examples. So there's a community engagement studio model. This is more of a consultative model. The studio consists of community representatives. These could be community members because they reside in that geographic community, or as I was saying, there is a common attribute, right, across all the members of this committee or this group, so that they can speak to the topic at hand. They could be patients, they could be parents, or they could be caregivers, for example. So this is a quick way for researchers to get input from that community or that patient population into the development, the way to implement the study, or the way to disseminate or spread the knowledge of the research findings. This is different from a standing advisory board. And it's also not meant to recruit research participants, although often this group can inform the ways to identify potential participants for research and ways to recruit participants. They also don't do data collection or are part of the research methodology. So there are distinctions, and if you compare about the community engagement studio model to that continuum that I showed you, you can see how this one falls within that community consultation and involvement, and not the collaboration or shared leadership. So there's a role for these. And they certainly fall within that continuum, but they're not as active, and certainly the leadership, the shared roles and bidirectional goal that we want isn't captured in this community engagement studio. We then have the community advisory board. This is also a group of representative stakeholders that serve as a link between a community of interest and researchers. CABs can be long-term institutions, or they can be project-based, established for a single purpose, as for research with a particular target group or for specific studies, or it's based on a specific disease. Now, we then move on to community-based participatory research. And really, this is the gold standard. We're always striving to do research in participatory, collaborative ways with our community partners, with our community of interest, because it involves our partners in equitable ways throughout the research process. It centers on a topic of importance to the community, and it aims to combine the knowledge of all stakeholders, of all parties involved. So the knowledge that our community of interest brings to the topic, the knowledge that the community partner brings to the topic, as well as the knowledge of the researcher in terms of research methods and ways to study the topic of importance. And so it also, along with combining the knowledge of everyone, we combine that with action to improve the health outcomes and eliminate health disparities and ultimately achieve social change. So the action really is on the use of those research results to advance the work. So how does CBPR facilitate social change and health equity? Because it addresses locally identified needs and priorities. It builds trust and respect between researchers and the communities, because we are taking them into consideration. They are setting the table with us, and we are going at their pace. It becomes relevant to target communities. The research is relevant, therefore there is greater buy-in, and communities feel that they are being listened to when we work with them to determine that research agenda. The research findings are applied to the community because they are relevant to the community, and ultimately, over time, it fosters public support for research, as I mentioned. So very quickly, I want to go through and show you a simple example of this community engagement continuum in some of the work that I've done. This work was actually done with a group of senior serving organizations that you see on your screen. And we aimed to use a CBPR approach to promote falls prevention in older adults. And this was a case where we actually had some funding to work together, both researchers and organizations serving older adults in the Washington Heights Inwood area of Manhattan, to arrive at a research question to address metabolic syndrome among older adults, so 65 and up. And so we went through this one-year process of learning about what is metabolic syndrome. So, it is a group of conditions, hypertension or high blood pressure, diabetes, and other conditions that lead to possibly stroke or heart failure. So, we had these sections, and we had this group of researchers and administrators from the community agencies, as well as older adults that reside in Washington Heights Inwood, attending these sessions and having these conversations. And as a reflection of this slow process, right, we had to also ensure that the older adults that were a part of this group felt comfortable to speak up. And it took a while. And eventually, we ended up right, breaking the ice to the point that they felt like speaking up. And they said, we realized that high blood pressure is an issue in our community, that diabetes, the incidence of diabetes is very high. But that's not, we can deal with that. That's not the utmost priority for us. It's falls and preventing falls. And that's what they were really scared about, because a fall could lead to a disability or it could actually lead to death. So that is when we, again, staying to a CBPR approach, we decided to pivot because we wanted to make sure that we were being responsive to the identified priorities of our community of older adults. And so we focused on falls prevention, and we looked at the literature and looked at, well, what are the programs, existing programs that have are evidence-based and therefore have shown to help to avoid falls among older adults. And so we found that some of the most recommended programs were actually already being offered at our senior centers, and that the Department for the Aging was actually quite supportive of these classes to help older adults avoid falls. However, the utilization of these classes was very poor across all the senior centers that we were working with. And so I teamed up with the senior centers and their clients to do some focus groups to learn how older adults perceived falls, and with the goal of being able to better promote the existence of these free classes at local senior centers, so that the uptake would go up, right? Remember, this work is action oriented. So we wanted to learn, well, how do older adults think of falls, so that we could better promote these existing classes with the goal of increasing their participation, i.e. their uptake. So that was the action oriented. So our community partners, the senior centers we were working with, also told us, you know, this is a group of older adults that tends to also have limited literacy. So we brought up actually different creative ways to, and we use collages to help us better understand how they perceived falls. And this is an example of this iterative process until we arrived at this flyer. And I should also say this coincided with COVID. So our approach to the promotion of these classes changed because everyone was home. And anyway, but this was also just an example of how we were able to come together and do this type of collaborative work where the community was actually dictating what they wanted and informing how we went about doing it. That work led to this 1 year $40,000 grant on to address how we could educate older adults about the risk of falls and what they could do to improve or minimize the risks of falling. And so ultimately, we wanted to use public access TV to try to reach more older adults on the topic of falls prevention. So we had a consumer advisory board. Remember, going back to the continuum of community engagement, this board had representatives of all the senior serving organizations in Upper Manhattan that was working with us. And we regularly met with them to get their feedback and their direction on the educational material that we were producing. And also with them, we arrived at doing these short episodes called Vibrant, a show about living your best age in New York City. And ultimately we did focus on falls prevention, but here the idea was that although initially we would focus on falls prevention, we could expand it to other topics. So I just want to end with letting you know to visit us online. For those of you who are interested in obtaining training on community-based participatory research, we do offer a course. There's more information on that course online at urbaninstitute.columbia.edu. We also have an off-campus space called Columbia Community Partnership for Health. We welcome your visit, and I've included my contact information as well as the contact information of my community partner on this project.
You need to unmute yourself.
Ludame, you're muted.
I was just telling you, I always enjoy your presentation. It's so informative and just makes my mind go all over and over and over. So I'm so thankful. And I'm sure that people have a lot of questions. I heard
I'm happy to take any and all questions.
Good. And I'm sure, I think I heard Dr. Bruce Rivera.
No, I was just saying that you needed to unmute yourself. I just put my statement in the chat.
Oh, okay. You put it in the chat.
And thank you, Dr. Rivera. I appreciate your comment in the chat.
Oh, okay. All right. Does anyone else have a question? I'm sure.
I just have a question, John Lewis. How do you, specifically, how do you go into a community and begin building trust where a community has distrusted the medical profession for quite a long time?
Right. So it's slowly and carefully, right? I like to practice cultural humility, and that is different from cultural competence. I think within the university research settings and within clinical educational environments, cultural competency is under promoted. The difference between cultural competency and cultural humility is that we are under cultural humility, we're constantly reflecting and listening. We are listening to what others are saying. We are reflecting on how we are reacting to what we're being told. And it's about holding yourself also accountable for sort of that baggage, right, that we bring because we may not belong to that same community. And so the idea is that we're striving always to be open and to genuinely listen and reflect on what people are telling us, and to be sensitive to the experiences that they've had, for example, with health systems, and our role in the experiences that they've had that has led to that distrust. So it's not just, acknowledging that they've had these awful experiences that has led to that distrust, is actually doing something about it, right? So it's not just talking the talk, but how are we walking, right? How are we being responsive? Because we need to correct those issues to build trust. And who we need to do it along with are our community leaders. And that is going to differ from community to community. In some communities, working with faith-based leaders is the right approach. In another community, it might be our local government representatives or the heads of our community agencies. It might be others that aren't affiliated with any of these groups, but they're active and respected community members. But I would say that we need to also internally look at ourselves, like especially in the context of health research. Universities, including Columbia, are looking internally. What needs to change among the university culture, the research culture, so that it reflects a respect and consideration for the communities we are serving through our clinical services, through our educational practices, but also through research.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Alejandra Aguirre. I do appreciate and I enjoy your presentation so very much. So thank you again. And with that note, I'm just going to encourage everyone, when you finish this program, I want you to join our community advisory board, because you will be present and you will represent the community every month as we go through and as we review research proposals, as we review different items that they bring to the community advisory board for your input and for your information about your community. And that's so important. So thank you. Thank you all. And again,
Thank you.
I thank you. And you know something I wanted to say, that's in Dr. Alejandra, you're still on, and I wanted everyone to know that you have been engaged in doing community-based participatory research for over 18 years. And you're very much into, you work with the organizations nationally and in Latin America on capacity building efforts around programs designed to implementation and evaluation in regards to community-based participatory research. And I think that's awesome.
Thanks, Lulame. I appreciate everyone's time, and I appreciate your support in inviting me back year after year. It really is one of the highlights of the work that I do, is just getting to chat with others that may not have a background in this, because this type of work is really important, and it's slow, but it's so worth it for what it brings. Mm-hmm.
Definitely. And after COVID and all the cries from the community and all the community's desire to know more and to get involved more, I say, bravo. Mm-hmm. Just keep it up. And thank you for coming back.
Now, thank you for the invitation, and I will see you next time.
Yes, you shall. Thank you.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.